Did you know that nearly 70%, 70% of Americans over 55 have been consuming certain vegetables that could actually be undermining their heart health?
Wow. That statistic jumped out at me too, right away from the sources we're looking at today.
It really is a figure that makes you stop and think, about what we assume, about foods we consider healthy.
Exactly. And that's what this deep dive is all about, isn't it?
Yes. I've got this stack of listener-provided sources, research, articles, notes, looking into how some really common vegetables, the ones often seen as just plain good for you, might pose some hidden risks.
Especially for heart health, and specifically for folks over 55.
Right. So our goal is to get past the headlines, really unpack this information, and pull out the most important insights for you, the listener.
We know you're looking for clear, actionable knowledge. You don't want to get bogged down in jargon.
Definitely. This deep dive is for anyone curious. Maybe you just want to be well-informed, or perhaps you're thinking about nutrition and aging from, well, a different angle.
And the sources do touch on how diets have evolved.
Yeah.
Right? How modern food processing is different from, say, traditional methods.
They do. And they're clear. The basic advice, eat your vegetables. That remains absolutely sound.
Absolutely. The key, the real sort of deep dive here is in the nuance.
Exactly. Particularly how those vegetables are prepared and consumed.
And that nuance, it just becomes so much more critical as we get older.
It really does. The sources highlight that conditions like hypertension, diabetes, high cholesterol, they're significantly more common in that over 55 group.
Yeah, the numbers are quite stark. We're talking nearly 70% of Americans between 60 and 79 having some form of cardiovascular disease.
And almost 2/3 of people over 60 dealing with high blood pressure.
Plus, you've got close to 27% over 65 with diabetes or prediabetes. So understanding how certain foods, even vegetables, can interact with these conditions.
Or even the medications people take for them.
Precisely. It's essential for making informed choices about what's actually on your plate.
So, based on this source material, we're going to explore 5 specific types or preparations of vegetables, common ones, that the research points to as having these potential hidden risks.
We'll explain why, and maybe most importantly, what practical alternatives the sources suggest.
It's really about empowering you with knowledge. It's not about taking away your favorite foods.
No, not at all. It's about understanding how preparation and consumption patterns really play a role in your heart health journey, especially, in your golden years.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's start with, well, a cornerstone of the American diet.
Ah, the white potato.
The white potato. You see it everywhere, used in just countless ways. The source material classifies it as a starchy vegetable, and its impact really seems to depend on how you eat it and how much.
That's exactly where the nuance comes in, isn't it? The problem isn't really the potato itself, per se.
Right. It's the preparation and the portion size. White potatoes, they have a higher glycemic index compared to many other vegetables.
Which means they can cause a quicker spike in blood sugar.
Exactly. And that's particularly relevant for that, nearly 27% of Americans over 65 dealing with diabetes or prediabetes.
Right. Those rapid blood sugar swings, they can contribute to inflammation over time, put stress on the cardiovascular system.
And the sources also point to a study, I think it was 2016, in the British Medical Journal linking higher potato consumption,
Especially French fries, yeah.
especially French fries, to an increased risk of hypertension. Now, when you consider nearly 2/3 of adults over 60 have high blood pressure, well, that connection is significant.
And the sources really emphasize the typical preparation methods. It said something like 35% of U.S. potato consumption is deep-fried, French fries, and chips.
Wow. That has all those unhealthy fats and extra calories you just wouldn't get from a plain baked potato.
Or think about mashed potatoes, right? Often loaded up with butter, cream, salt.
Definitely. These common ways of preparing them transform a pretty simple vegetable into something high in things we generally want to limit for heart health. Calories, unhealthy fats, sodium.
Plus, as the sources note, a big serving of potatoes often means less room on the plate for other, more nutrient-dense vegetables.
So the core insight here seems to be that while white potatoes themselves aren't inherently bad, that high glycemic impact, and especially the common unhealthy preparations, well, they can pose risks. Risks are blood sugar and blood pressure.
Concerns that are highly relevant for older adults.
Yeah, but you absolutely don't have to give them up entirely. The source material offers some pretty practical alternatives.
Yeah, the good news is there are ways around it. Yeah. Portion control is definitely key. Maybe aiming for about a half-cup serving, something like that.
And how you prepare them matters immensely. Boiling or roasting with the skin on, maybe using some heart-healthy olive oil. That's a much better choice than deep frying or loading them up with cream and butter.
And sweet potatoes are highlighted quite a bit as a fantastic alternative. They're lower on that glycemic index, plus they're packed with beneficial beta-carotene.
Yeah, the sources also suggest some smart substitutions, like using cauliflower mash instead of potatoes, or even doing a potato plus thing.
Oh yeah, mixing mashed white potatoes with other mashed veggies like parsnips or cauliflower adds nutrients, lowers the overall glycemic load.
That brings to mind Robert's story from the source materials, I think he was 72, struggling with uncontrolled hypertension.
Right. And by making some pretty simple changes, cutting back on the white potatoes, swapping some for sweet potatoes, prioritizing greens, his blood pressure saw significant improvement.
It's a great illustration, isn't it? How adapting how you eat a really common food can make a real difference.
Definitely. Okay, so moving from one common staple to something you'll find in almost every pantry, and which offers, well, incredible convenience.
Canned vegetables. For many people, especially older adults, they can be a real lifeline for quick, accessible nutrition.
They are incredibly convenient, no doubt, but the deep dive into these sources highlights a pretty significant hidden thread inside those cans: excess sodium.
Ah, yes. This is maybe the biggest concern the sources raise about them. A single serving of canned vegetables can contain anywhere from what, 250 to 800 milligrams of sodium?
Yeah, it's a huge range, but even the lower end adds up fast. Now, compare that to the American Heart Association's ideal daily limit of just 1,500 milligrams, especially for those with hypertension or heart disease.
It becomes clear how quickly that adds up, particularly when you remember that around 70% of Americans over 65 have high blood pressure,
And the sources explain quite simply how that excess sodium impacts you. Basically, it causes your body to hold on to more fluid.
which increases your blood volume.
Exactly. And that makes your heart work harder to pump blood
Okay, so over time, that extra strain contributes to higher blood pressure.
and increases the risk of serious cardiovascular issues like heart failure or stroke. High sodium is also linked to arterial stiffness, essentially making your blood vessels less flexible.
The sources gave canned green beans as an example, right? Often hitting up to 400 milligrams of sodium per cup.
Right. And there's that disconnect the sources mentioned. People just don't typically think of canned veggies as high sodium foods. It's sort of hidden in plain sight.
So the insight here is that while they're convenient, most standard canned vegetables are significant sources of hidden sodium, and that directly contributes to hypertension and increases heart disease risk, issues really prevalent in the over 55 population.
But the good news, again, from the sources, is that you don't have to abandon canned vegetables entirely. There are simple ways to mitigate that sodium problem.
Like looking for no salt added or low sodium versions, that seems like the first step.
Definitely. They
Yeah.
dramatically reduce the sodium content, but the sources also point to an incredibly easy action: rinsing.
Just rinsing them.
Yeah. Simply draining and rinsing canned vegetables under running water for even just 1 minute can reduce the sodium by anywhere from 9 to 23%.
Wow, that's such a practical tip. Really easy to do.
It really is. And you can also mix and match. Combine fresh, frozen, or low-sodium canned options in a dish.
And frozen vegetables are often a good bet, right? They're usually flash frozen quickly, so they preserve nutrients without needing added sodium.
Exactly. Frozen are often a consistently good choice from a sodium perspective. And of course, if you're inclined, home canning gives you complete control over the salt.
The sources shared Eleanor's story too. I think she was 78. Her high blood pressure improved just by starting to rinse her canned vegetables and swapping some out for frozen options.
And using herbs and spices for flavor instead of relying on the salt already in the can. Another powerful example, really, of how a seemingly small change can have a measurable health impact.
Okay, so convenience has its place, but being aware of that hidden sodium in canned goods is really key. What about another traditional favorite that might surprise some people?
Pickled vegetables. They hold such a special place in many culinary traditions, don't they?
Absolutely. Pickles, pickled beets, pickled onions, you name it. The sources describe them as traditional but potentially troublesome for heart health.
And the trouble, once again, boils down primarily to just extraordinarily high sodium. A single medium dill pickle, it can pack between 800 and 1,200 milligrams of sodium.
1,200 in one pickle.
Yeah. And other pickled items often have 300 to 600 milligrams per serving. That's a massive sodium load in just a bite or two.
Especially, again, for the 70% of adults over 65 who are managing hypertension.
Right. And the sources cite a 2021 study showing that high sodium foods can cause measurable arterial stiffening within just 30 minutes of eating them.
30 minutes. Wow.
Yeah, and this effect is apparently even more pronounced in older adults, so it's not just a long-term concern. There seems to be an immediate impact, too,
And beyond the salt, commercially produced pickled vegetables often contain other things like added sugars, preservatives, artificial colorings,
which the sources suggest could contribute to inflammation, adding another layer of concern.
and is different from fermented foods, right?
Exactly. While traditionally fermented vegetables like sauerkraut, in small amounts, offer probiotic benefits, most pickles you buy use vinegar and salt, not fermentation, so you don't get those gut health advantages.
Plus, the sources raise a really critical point about medication interactions.
Oh yes, this is important. If you're taking certain blood pressure medications like ACE inhibitors, ARBs, or potassium-sparing diuretics, the high sodium and sometimes high potassium in pickled vegetables could potentially cause a dangerous electrolyte imbalance, something to definitely discuss with a doctor.
Okay, so the insight here is that despite their cultural appeal, pickled vegetables are often extremely high in sodium. That poses immediate and long-term risks for blood pressure, increasing stroke risk, and potentially interacting dangerously with common heart medications, especially relevant for older adults.
But again, you don't necessarily need to eliminate them entirely if you enjoy them. The sources offer ways to enjoy similar flavors more safely.
Moderation seems key, like thinking of them as a condiment, maybe just a tablespoon or two.
Exactly. Treat it like a flavor accent, not a side dish. And look for lower sodium versions if they're available, though they can be hard to find.
Quick pickling vegetables at home was another suggestion, right? You can use significantly less salt and still get that tangy flavor.
Yeah, refrigerator pickles are great for that. Or creating vinegar-based salads with fresh vegetables for a similar taste profile without the sodium bomb.
And the sources mention that your taste buds can adapt to lower sodium levels over time, which is encouraging.
It's true. Retraining your palate is definitely possible. Makes extremely salty foods less appealing eventually.
The sources shared George's story. I think he was 67. He improved his uncontrolled hypertension by switching from store-bought pickles to making lower salt refrigerator pickles at home.
And incorporating small amounts of actual fermented sauerkraut, probably for the probiotic benefit too. Another great example of respecting tradition while making healthier choices.
Definitely. Okay, let's shift gears from tangy and crunchy to something that just screams comfort food for so many people.
Ah, creamed vegetable dishes, yes. We're
Yeah.
talking creamed spinach, maybe green bean casserole, corn chowder thickened with cream, those kinds of things.
The classics. The source material really highlights how these dishes take inherently healthy vegetables and completely transform their nutritional profile, usually not for the better, heart health-wise.
They absolutely do. By combining vegetables with, well, heavy cream, butter, cheese, often refined flours for thickening, you're adding significant amounts of saturated fat, sodium, and calories.
The sources gave the example of just half a cup of creamed spinach, potentially containing 12 to 15 grams of saturated fat.
Which is pushing the American Heart Association's total daily limit of around 13 grams for the entire day in just half a cup.
And that saturated fat is strongly linked to elevated LDL cholesterol, the bad kind that contributes to plaque buildup in arteries. A major concern when, 47% of Americans over 65 have high cholesterol.
Exactly. Then add in the high sodium content typically found in these dishes, often 500 to 800 milligrams per serving.
And you're compounding the risk for those already dealing with hypertension.
Right. The sources also note that the extended cooking times can degrade some delicate nutrients, like vitamin C and folate. And the refined carbs often used in the sauces can cause unhelpful blood sugar spikes.
Especially problematic for someone with diabetes, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, the sources point out that health perception gap. People might count these dishes as healthy vegetable servings without fully accounting for all the added fats, sodium, and calories.
So the core insight here is pretty clear. While starting with a vegetable, these dishes often become high in saturated fat, sodium, and calories due to the preparation. That directly impacts common issues like high cholesterol and hypertension, which are so prevalent in older adults.
But comfort food doesn't have to be a nutritional minefield, right? The sources offered some excellent lighter alternatives.
Absolutely. Using ingredients like evaporated skim milk, thickened with a little cornstarch instead of heavy cream and butter, can drastically cut the saturated fat and calories.
Or exploring plant-based options like cashew cream or pureed white beans for creaminess.
Yes, those add heart-healthy fats and fiber instead of saturated fat. Or using flavorful reduced broths or even some plain Greek yogurt stirred in at the end can add creaminess and moisture without all the heavy additives.
And simply roasting vegetables often brings out their natural sweetness and depth of flavor, reducing the need for those rich, heavy sauces in the first place.
Definitely. The sources mentioned Patricia, a 71-year-old whose elevated cholesterol improved, even while she was on statins, after she started making lighter versions of her favorite cream spinach, using pureed white beans for that creaminess.
That's such an encouraging example. Adapting a favorite dish to align with heart health goals is totally possible.
It really shows you can reimagine comfort food to be nourishing as well as delicious. Okay, let's move from creamy dishes to something many people grab thinking it's like a quick health boost in a glass.
Ah, vegetable juice cocktails.
Yeah.
You see them marketed so heavily as a convenient way to get your daily vegetable servings. But the sources label them quite starkly. I think the phrase was hidden sugar and sodium bombs.
And, well, that name seems pretty accurate based on the data presented. The primary concern the sources highlight is, again, that extraordinarily high sodium content. An 8-ounce serving can contain between 600 and 900 milligrams of sodium.
6 to 900 in one small glass. That's close to or even more than half the ideal daily sodium limit for someone with hypertension.
And because it's liquid, people often drink larger portions, right? 12 or 16 ounces is pretty common, so you could easily consume 900 to 1,800 milligrams of sodium in just moments.
Without even feeling full like you would from eating the actual vegetables.
Exactly. The sources also point out that even the low-sodium versions often have added sugars, maybe high-fructose corn syrup, or fruit juice concentrates to improve taste. And those contribute to inflammation and metabolic issues, increasing cardiovascular risk.
And crucially, the juicing process removes most of the beneficial fiber. Fiber is just so vital for heart health, isn't it? It helps manage cholesterol, stabilizes blood sugar, supports a healthy gut.
Absolutely vital. And without that fiber, any natural or added sugars in the juice get absorbed very quickly. That's particularly problematic for the significant number of older adults with diabetes.
Plus, as the sources note, drinking juice can easily replace eating whole vegetables, so you miss out on both the fiber and the satiety, the feeling of fullness that solid food provides.
So the core insight here is that despite all the health marketing, commercial vegetable juice cocktails are often loaded with excessive sodium and added sugars while stripping away crucial fiber. That poses real risks for blood pressure and blood sugar management, very relevant to aging health.
But if you like the convenience or the taste, the sources do offer healthier alternatives here too.
Yeah. Look for specifically low-sodium versions, aiming for less than 140 milligrams per serving. That's the official definition. Even better, make your own at home.
Right, that way you control exactly how much sodium or sugar goes in. You can use herbs, spices, a squeeze of citrus for flavor instead.
You can also dilute commercial juices with water, or maybe even unsalted broth, to cut the concentration of sodium and sugar per sip.
And perhaps the best alternative highlighted by the sources are vegetable smoothies.
Yes. By blending the whole vegetable, you retain all that valuable fiber. Makes it a far more filling and nutrient-dense option than juice. Or even just infusing water with sliced cucumber, celery, or bell pepper for a hint of flavor without any of the downsides.
The sources share that powerful example of Harold, I think he was 76. His high blood pressure and even his kidney function saw significant improvement after he swapped his daily vegetable juice cocktail for a homemade vegetable smoothie.
That story really emphasizes the point, doesn't it? Even seemingly small dietary choices, especially something you consume daily like a beverage, can have a really substantial impact on your health.
Diving into these sources really challenges some common assumptions, doesn't it? The material also directly addressed some common misconceptions people have about vegetables and heart health.
They did. Like that idea that all vegetables are automatically equal for your heart. The source makes it really clear that preparation, processing, and what you add to them fundamentally changes the picture.
Right, or the myth that, say, canned or pickled vegetables are just as healthy as fresh or frozen when we've clearly seen the significant sodium difference.
And that idea that vegetable juice is equivalent to eating whole vegetables, completely missing the vital role of fiber.
There's also the nuance between sweet potatoes and white potatoes in terms of glycemic impact, or maybe assuming portion size doesn't matter if it's just a vegetable.
And finally, the sources really debunk the myths that things like pickles are sort of free foods, or that creamed spinach counts simply as a serving of greens, when the hidden fat, salt, and sugar often outweigh the basic vegetable benefits in those preparations.
Understanding these nuances is really key to making truly informed choices, isn't it?
It is. But the great thing is, the source material doesn't just identify the problems. It provides really actionable steps you can actually take.
Absolutely. The sources offer very practical guidance, like starting by reading nutrition labels closely. Look specifically at sodium, added sugars, and saturated fat, even on items you think are healthy.
Changing your preparation methods is huge. Steaming, baking, grilling, or roasting instead of frying or deep fat cooking. Using olive oil, herbs, spices, garlic, citrus to add flavor instead of relying heavily on salt or butter.
Portion control matters, especially for those starchy vegetables like potatoes or dishes loaded with added fat and sodium, and prioritizing fresh and frozen vegetables whenever possible, as they generally have the best nutrient profile and no added sodium.
Substitute smartly. The sources suggest things like cauliflower mash instead of potato, plant-based creams instead of dairy, or spiralized vegetables instead of traditional pasta. Lots of creative ideas.
Making your own versions of things like those low-salt refrigerator pickles or homemade smoothies gives you complete control over the ingredients. That's a big one.
And a simple but effective rule from the sources is planning your plate, aiming for half of it to be filled with non-starchy vegetables at meals. It's a good visual cue.
The sources also suggest monitoring how different foods affect you, perhaps keeping a simple food and blood pressure log, and importantly, getting support from family, friends, or your healthcare team.
Yes, because these small, consistent changes are what truly add up over time. It's not about a radical overhaul overnight necessarily.
Yeah, the source material included insights from various experts, cardiologists, dietitians, geriatricians, and their consensus really reinforces everything we've discussed.
It does. They emphasize that preparation and sodium make a massive difference, especially for older adults. That frozen vegetables are often a better choice than canned due to sodium. To be mindful of portion size and read labels carefully, particularly with conditions like kidney or heart issues.
And perhaps most encouragingly, that even small adjustments to how you prepare and consume vegetables can yield significant positive results for your heart health.
Exactly. Small changes add up.
This deep dive into the source material has been incredibly insightful. It really highlights that how you prepare and consume vegetables can be just as important for heart health, especially as we age, as the type of vegetable itself.
Definitely. The 5 areas the sources pointed to, those fried or heavily prepared white potatoes, conventional canned vegetables, traditional pickled vegetables, creamy vegetable dishes, and commercial vegetable juice cocktails, pose risks primarily due to added sodium, unhealthy fats, added sugars, or the removal of vital fiber.
The takeaway seems clear. Fresh, frozen, and minimally processed vegetables prepared simply with little added salt, fat, or sugar remain the best choices for supporting heart health.
And the consensus from the sources is that making even small, smart changes can have a substantial impact on managing blood pressure, cholesterol, and overall well-being. It's empowering, really.
So, to reiterate some of that actionable advice from the source material, maybe take a look at what's in your pantry. Experiment with lighter versions of your favorite dishes. Practice smart shopping by checking labels.
Enjoy traditional foods mindfully, maybe with some adjustments. Share this knowledge with others who might benefit. Talk to your doctor or a dietitian about your specific needs.
And monitor your progress to see what works best for you.
Remember, as the sources suggest, it's not about eliminating foods you enjoy entirely. It's really about adapting how you consume them to better support your heart health.
Every meal is an opportunity, isn't it, to make a choice that benefits you?
Well said. And if you want to dig deeper, the sources mention some great resources. Things like the American Heart Association, the National Institute on Aging, My Plate for Older Adults, the Mayo Clinic.
And even local cooperative extension services. Lots of places offer even more guidance and recipes.
Okay, so we've seen how simple preparation changes can really transform a vegetable's impact on your heart. Here's something to think about. What other small daily habits might be quietly influencing your health in ways you haven't considered?